That's it. Okay, so we're good. Yay. All right, everybody. So everybody has two lives. The second one begins when you realize you only have one, where second life was where empty nesters, newly single, and those starting over age 3. Your healthy, happy, hip years are just beginning. And I'm so thrilled today. I have my good friend, Aubrey Emory, and I want to read you. I could not remember these credentials because they're as long as my arm. Okay, Aubrey Emory is a professional genealogist and attorney. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in English from Wellesley College, a Juris Doctorate from the Boston University School of Law, a certificate in genealogical research from Boston University's Center for Professional Education. She has completed the Daughters of the American Revolution's genealogical education program levels 1, 2, and 3, and the registrar training model. And she regularly participates in genealogy seminars and conferences. She is also a member of multiple lineage societies. Areas of expertise include legal genealogical research, 18th, 19th, and 20th century U.S. research with the focus on the North and Southeast, lineage society applications, and Italian records, immigration. Welcome, Aubrey. This is just, I'm like, okay, this show's over.
Thank you, Steph. That was good. Good job.
Yeah, well, I know. I can read. Thank God I can read. I want to just tell everybody before we get started, I have asked Aubrey to work with me on my own personal lineage because I am looking for more living relatives in Sicily, so that when I go back, because I will spend extended time in Sicily, I am looking for living relatives to go visit and to connect with. However, we have found some very interesting information about my mom's side of the family, which is, they're not even from Italy or Sicily, but it's been very interesting. So welcome, Aubrey. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
So let's talk. What would be the reason why anyone would want to dig? Because sometimes people go, I don't want to know all that.
There's so many reasons. First of all, it's a really addictive, fun pastime or hobby, and those of you who aren't doing it now but get into it you may find yourself at 2 a.m. going, just one more record, just one more search. So it's really fun once you get into it. But people have all sorts of reasons. You have the family secrets or the family things that weren't discussed, something doesn't make sense, answers people always wanted to know about their family. You have, wanting to know where you came from or wanting to know more about your culture. Sometimes there's health reasons. There's a lot of health information that can be pulled from death certificates. And if you pull enough of them, sometimes you can see patterns in a family. And I know people who have done that. And also just learning about, I think it's a great way of learning about history. I love getting kids involved in it because it makes things real for them, and I hope that they carry that through with them, especially younger kids, when they get to a history class in high school or college where they have that personal connection. I'm a member of the Mayflower Society, and as soon as I got in, I signed up my 2 nephews as junior members, not so they could be like, oh, we're Mayflower descendants, but because I know they're starting to learn about that in school. And maybe when they talk about the Pilgrims, they'll pay attention a little bit more closely because they have that connection.
I could see that because my kids were raised in Georgia, and when I would bring them up here, I would take them to Paul Revere House, and we'd go, we'd be all over the North End going to the Old North Church, because when they would be studying all that, it makes it real. They've been there, especially being, for us, I'm from Boston, so I was always walking by Paul Revere House. It was not a big deal, but for somebody in Georgia, it makes it tangible. So I can see why you would do that. So I like the health reasons, but I also think too that it's just great. It's great information and it's fun. It's amazing what you find out. So what are some interesting stories, like some wacko stories, not just my family, but some really funny things that you have come across?
Well, most of the really crazy stuff, I don't know that I found a lot that was really funny, and some of it, if people had discovered at the time it happened, could have been traumatic or scandalous. But you come down a few generations, and you didn't know those people, and it's no big deal. I had a friend who always wanted to know about her great great grandparents, because her great grandmother and her grandmother never spoke of them, and it was, you not just wouldn't speak of them, but would get very upset if you tried to raise the subject. And she was very curious, and so we found out that they were Irish immigrants. I actually found out where they were, from Northern Ireland, and I thought, well, maybe you want to go visit. Now you know where they're from. So I think that's always nice to know. But we dug a little deeper and found out her great great grandfather was in jail or prison for a short period of time, probably about 3 years. We haven't discovered why. And then a short time after that, he was drowned in the Charles. And there was a newspaper article, and there was all this information, and we don't know why, but it's kind of scandalous. And it actually, and sadly, it really broke up the family. But now she understands why. And she personally was not traumatized by it, but she understood why her great grandmother, who was a child when this all happened, was probably really traumatized by it and wouldn't talk about, maybe embarrassed. I'm not sure. And it gave her, and more particularly her mother, some closure, because this was her mother's grandmother who she remembered, and just never knew why it was such a upsetting topic. I mean, would get yelled at if she tried to bring it up. And so he did bring this closure and these answers. And at the same time, it was so long ago that they weren't, wasn't mortified. Sometimes when I find information, I think about how to frame it.
Oh, so how to tell people? I know, like Steph, your great grandmother had 5 husbands, right? I mean, this is so interesting. But you know what I think, though, too, part of it is when there is a lot of pain, and of course I'm all about helping people work through whatever they're dealing with in their lives today, and a lot of it comes from pain from our upbringings and what we dealt with. But when we understand what they lived with, things start to open up, and there can be some healing there. So have you seen any of that?
I think I haven't personally. What's interesting, I did a probate case last year where it was really interesting. I don't know what the outcome, so I can't speak to whether there was healing, but it was a very weird case where the decedent, and I was working with the attorney who was handling his estate, had been never adopted, and they couldn't figure out why, but he had been fostered out as a very little boy, as like a toddler, and he had lived with this family, and he had 2 sisters, foster sisters, who considered him their brother. So it was very interesting. And he died. He never married. He died. Everything was cut and dry as far as the will. Everything was in proper order. But when his sisters were cleaning out his effects, the story they had been raised with is that he was orphaned, and they came to live with them. But I thought it was odd that he was never formally adopted, especially since he was really little. They found a a church, like a prayer card, or from his birth mother, and in it was like an obituary, and it listed her husband who had survived her, so he was still alive at some point, and multiple other children. So they wanted to know if they were trying to find his birth siblings, really to tell them, just to really close out the estate. They weren't entitled to anything, but just to see if they were alive and to sort of check that box. And I'd like to think, so they did. We found, I think there were 5. 4, one was deceased and one was a half sibling. And so 3 full siblings, 1 half sibling who were still alive. Found them all different parts of the country. I got their contact information to the lawyer so she could do what she needed to do for proper notification. But I'd like to think that there was some closure on their side. I don't know. They were all older. He was the baby. I don't know if they knew whatever happened to him, but it made sense why he was never adopted. I don't know that his father was able to care for all those children, but his father didn't die until decades later.
Right.
So the reason he was never adopted is he was never eligible for adoption, and for whatever reason, the father didn't relinquish his parental rights. And that was interesting to me because it answered a question for me. I thought, you know, this is odd. This was a family who loved him, who raised him as their own. Why did he stay as foster, in sort of foster status? Answered that question. And I like to think that these siblings, like, he didn't just disappear. They found out what happened to their little brother. So they would have known they had a little brother.
See, I love all that stuff. We talked a little bit last night as we were discussing what we were going to discuss today, and you were mentioning the ancestry of homes.
Oh yes, house histories. That's a really fun niche area of genealogy that some people who are just getting started don't think about it, but houses have genealogies. So this would be mostly antique homes. And so in the North and the Southeast, you have, you know, 18th and some 17th century homes. And particularly in Massachusetts, the deeds are all available on the Registry of Deeds sites and on familysearch.org. You can click through to find the deeds, and there are indexes. So you can basically use those records to trace the ownership of property and houses. And then, so now you, it's called a deed chain. You create, like, this person owned it first, then they sold to this person, and so on and so forth. So you have this chain of owners, and then and with dates, and you overlay that with genealogical records, like census records, like newspaper articles. There's a couple big, newspapers.com and Genealogy Bank are two big for pay newspaper repositories where you can look up information. So now you know the owner's names, and you can find a little bit about who lived in your home. If you're the owner of the historic home, you can find out things, perhaps if there was like a Revolutionary soldier or a Union soldier or Confederate soldier who lived there. You can, I don't know, find out the names of the people, the professions. We talked about sometimes people find things in attics or basements that were left behind, and that may make more sense when you have a record of who lived there before, whether it's weapons or tools. Maybe a blacksmith lived there. Maybe you find, I don't know, a horseshoe in the basement or something. Right. Yeah, it's really fun, and it you know, gives the house a whole new personality.
Absolutely. My cousin has the Underground Railroad right up into his basement, which is so cool.
Right.
So it's very interesting, and I just love all that, and especially if you have a ghost, you can find out maybe who was there.
You can do that's where you get the census records. You'd have to do some triangulation. Exactly. You'd have to perhaps see or sense the ghost and get a feel, like if it's a visible ghost and they're wearing period clothing, maybe you can narrow it down to the newspaper. Sometimes you can find in the newspapers if someone died in the home. You can use it's a fun way of identifying people. Yep.
So people have a lot of time on their hands now. Everybody's at home hanging out. I'm sure in this last 4 weeks that everybody's been home, everybody's house is sparkly clean. So what would be, this is a great hobby that you could take up, and what's a great, like, where should they start? What tips do you have for newbies in the genealogical research?
So I have a few ideas. The first thing I want to make people aware of, if they're not aware of, is that most libraries, and you would need a library card and library with online access. Most libraries have Ancestry.com, the library edition, which is for free, but you have to be in the library to use it. You can't log in from home. You'd have to have a paid subscription for that. Right now, because of what's going on and because the libraries are all shut down, they've actually made Ancestry Library Edition available from home. You would need a library card, and you would first go to your library's website, make sure they have Ancestry Library Edition. Most around here do. And then you would log on and follow the instructions for accessing it. So you can do all of that research from home that you normally would have had to go to the library for if you don't have a paid subscription, and it's still free, which is nice. You can also start, if you use Ancestry, you can always do a tree for free on Ancestry. The thing is that only some of their content is free, so you won't be able to see anything, but that's where the library edition fills in those blanks. But for someone who is just starting out, or someone who has started and wants to maybe go back and re-examine their tree, or maybe they hit a brick wall, the most common error I see, and I've certainly done it, is you have this family story that was handed down, like we came over on the Mayflower, or we're descended from Charlemagne, or whatever it is. And people leap to that event or to that famous person and then try to like shoehorn or work their way back down. You always go in the other direction. You start with what you know. You start with yourself, your parents, and you verify all of those dates. Now, some of them you just know. You know your own birth date, presumably. But you start with what you know, and then you don't move back to the next generation until you really are confident and you have documentation. It can be virtual, but image documentation, verifying things like dates, birth dates, death dates, marriage, immigration, to the best you can. And once you feel really solid that you have the right people, you then move to the next generation. And that keeps you from doing what I call jumping into someone else's tree.
Right.
Because it happens. And then eventually you get to hopefully where you're trying to get to, whether it's the Mayflower, whether it's the Revolution, or whether it's Sicily. You get there, but you don't work backwards.
Right.
The other thing, speaking of jumping into someone's tree, I would advise people to always be skeptical, have a dose of healthy skepticism about what is in other people's online trees on Ancestry or any of the other sites that have online trees. I'm not saying completely discount the information, but there's a lot of errors out there. And so, but there's also a lot of good information. So the way you verify is think of them as clues. So if you're using Ancestry, you get that little green leaf and it links you to someone else's family tree. I'm not saying don't go look at it, but you can always see what they have for documentation supporting that evidence. So supporting that so-and-so was born on this date, or these were their parents. And verify the information yourself. Make your own assessment. If someone's attached a birth certificate and you can tell it is the right person, then that's great. And you might want to copy that into your tree. But if someone's only evidence is someone else's tree, and there's a lot of sort of unsourced evidence out there, don't use it. Use it as a clue, and then go down some different avenues and see if you can prove it yourself. But don't just take it on faith. Don't assume that anyone on any of these sites knows more than you do.
So, I mean, I know that with my own tree, I got to a certain point and I just couldn't take it because it was too much. It became overwhelming, and because now, as we see from what you found with my great grandmother having 5 husbands and all these half siblings of my grandmother that we had no clue about.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I mean, my mother knew some of them, but not, and my mother was told they were cousins, a few of them. They were siblings.
Their children, may have been.
So I guess, it got to be too much and I could only get so far. So what would you recommend for people who get exacerbated and just sort of leave it alone?
So, first of all, don't try to go down every branch all at once. It can get very overwhelming. So I say focus on a specific question or a specific problem or a specific brick wall. And using your example, I would say, because you only had her first name and it turned out it may have been a middle name, like she had another first name. Right. And I started seeing that other name coming up in the records. And when I asked you about it, you were able to verify it with your mother. So that's an important ask, particularly older generations. Ask them what they know. Ask them if you hit a snag, ask them, does this sound right? Do you remember anyone by this name? Sometimes people will say too quickly, I don't remember anything, but if you get them talking, it's amazing what they actually do remember and what comes out. And I mean, at a certain point, if you hit a serious brick wall and you've really exhausted all your resources, then it's time to engage a professional genealogist if you want to answer the question. Right. So that's another route for sure. But I would say really just focus on the one problem and give yourself time. A lot of times, and this is why it's good to ask other people in your family, I always say, particularly in extended families, that information gets shared differently. So a story may come down and this cousin may have part of the story and this other cousin may have been told different details and this cousin may have photographs of the people. And cousins A and B didn't even know that. And so sometimes bringing together extended members of a family can it's like a big puzzle and everyone has a piece and you all have to share the information to answer those questions. Sometimes.
Yeah, I found that with the Palermo Saporito situation, there's two different stories to that. The one that I heard and then the one that one of my cousins, when we connected with our DNA, told me a little bit different story. So yeah, you can see that. But I would imagine sometimes, and especially with the older folks, that it might be difficult to bring up some of those sort of sensitive things. And you want to tap into that because, let's face it, we're not all living here forever. And, if we have older folks, we want to ask those questions. How would you, what advice would you give with that?
So the first thing I would say is if you can do it, if the person doesn't mind, I would always say, if you can record it, we all have recorders on our smartphones. If you can record what they say so you can review it later or write everything down, that's step one. Like don't lose that information. But you can sometimes start them talking about their past in a more innocuous way. So one question I really like, I mean, if you go online and Google, questions to ask relatives about genealogy, there's all sorts of lists that are interesting. And some of them seem like, I don't want to say throwaway questions, but so mild, like what was your favorite subject in school? Or what did you do at Easter? Like, how did you celebrate? Little things like that. But first of all, I think it's interesting. And second of all, when they start talking, especially if it's a family gathering, you start sort of bringing in other stories. Oh, I remember my great-grandmother joined us up until she passed when I was 8 or something. Oh, really? Tell me about her. What was her name? Do you know what her maiden name? But let them get to the meatier stuff, sometimes by starting with a lighter question.
Right. And everyone likes to talk about themselves, whatever they like, whatever they've done and what they liked and all of that. So, and, I know now, after being in Sicily, and I'm saying this for the benefit of the audience, after being in Sicily for extended time, it's heartbreaking to me that my grandmother's gone. Because I don't have anyone to talk to about this, because she was the one that was the connection to Sicily. In fact, I dedicated my book that's going to be published about Sicilian lifestyle, but I dedicated my book to her because she was the one that kept us connected to Sicily. She was the one. And so now that she's gone, and I'm starting to do all this, I feel bad. So for all of you people out there that have older folks in your life, ask those questions. I would say start, getting them talking, find out who was, what, their aunts, just like some of the pictures I have of my grandmother, and I don't know who the people are.
Right, right. I have some pictures like that I inherited from my grandmother, well, from my mother, and it was a box that hadn't been opened for years. And some of them, I've been able to identify a lot of them, but some of them, it's hard because I want to know who they are. I feel like pictures deserve a name.
It's a story. It's a story.
Yeah. And there are some ways, I mean, sometimes you have to make certain assumptions, and using photos in genealogy is a whole nother topic that would take a whole nother session, but there are little things you can do, like if they're professional studios, they'll usually be marked with the name of the studio, and studios were very regional. So like if I have branches, my father's family was in Maryland forever and ever, going back, in Virginia. My mother's family was more South Carolina and Georgia. So if I have a picture that is marked with a studio stamp from Columbia, South Carolina, and I don't know who the person is in it, I can at least first say it's probably not my dad's side of the family, probably my mom's side of the family. So that the studio marks, or even just anything that people wrote on the back, can be sometimes helpful. And then you look at the clothing, and you can also Google, clothing of a certain age, or you can get familiar with, okay, this is turn of the century, and keeping in mind, particularly definitely depending on someone's economic status, that they might not be wearing the dress that came out that year. They might be wearing clothing from a few years before because they're not buying new clothes every year. But it didn't change, you didn't go from hoop skirts to jeans in a couple of years. So you can narrow it down based on hairstyle, based on clothing, obviously gender, and now you have a place because you have a studio mark. And then you start looking at your tree and think about, okay, who's the short list of people that fit in? You can gauge the age of a person. This woman, this person would have been born, couldn't have been older than 25 and couldn't have been younger than, say, 18. Therefore, my great-great-great-grandmother is out. So you start narrowing it down. It's really, that's the fun part, is the detective work. And I always tell people, it's like you said about wishing your grandmother was here, and I certainly wish I could share some of these photos with my grandmother because I think she would know who they are. But it's also important not to despair if those people aren't here anymore, to ask those questions. We talked about this. It doesn't mean the information is lost to the ages. It can be more challenging than just asking someone. But a lot of times people think information is just gone, and it's really not. And you can answer some of those questions, and that's the beauty of genealogy.
Well, I wanted to mention this for the people that are watching. What I've done with what you've done for me is my cousins on that side of the family that we have all the crazy stuff going on. We've been doing Zoom calls, and so tonight we're going to do a Zoom call with my cousins, and I'm able to share my screen and show them the tree that you have added to. So and it makes for great conversation with the cousins, because someone will say they don't, they're like, wow, this is really, so it's in this time where we're kind of all locked down, and a lot of people are doing these Zoom calls with their families, or they're doing FaceTime calls. It makes for really great conversation.
Definitely. That's a great way of doing it, because you're bringing everyone together without having to deal with the logistics of driving somewhere, or people are busy. You can usually people can make time for a Zoom call sometimes a little more easily than if they have to go somewhere. If this was information that was not known, I think with you, I just needed to verify her first name, her real first name. And then we were off like a shot. Then we got maiden name. Then we got her parents' name. Then because we knew her father's name, I found an immigration document that indicated he was from County Cork, Ireland.
Right.
So now we have a place.
Right.
And there are Irish records we could now look at to see if we can find his birth, like christening. The Catholic Church in Ireland has a lot of records that they've put online for free.
Right.
Through I think it's the Irish National, it's the Irish Library or State Library. It's their sort of country level library.
And the one thing too, I just this kind of popped into my head is I sent you a scanned copy of my great grandmother from Riesi. Their marriage certificate, but I thought it said 1911, but they wrote the numbers a little differently.
That's the other thing is, yeah, sometimes looking at these handwritten, whether it's script, and I know kids don't learn cursive in school today, which breaks my heart, because if you're looking at old documents, you have to be able to read it. And then when you go back even further, and then you go into another country, the way the letters are formed are sometimes different, and you have to adjust to that. There's some great handwriting references on Family Search. You have to poke around. They have a wiki, and you can find examples. They've said, like, this is a capital A in 19th century Italian handwriting. This is a lowercase a. And so there are some guides to help people with different language and how the letters were written and the numbers. But yes, the 4 the 4 back then looked a lot like a 1.
Yeah, so I was kind of glad to find that my great grandmother got married at 15 and not 13.
She's a little bit older than we thought. That's good.
A little bit. But so we're gonna wrap this up, because I know you have work to do and we all have work to do. And but I'm so happy that we talked about this. And how can people find you? Where are you?
Sure. I'm on a few different places. So I have a website. It's www.whitebirchresearch.com. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram, also under White Birch Research. So birch like a tree for family tree, research like what you do. I would love, on my social media sites, I try to post mostly free resources or lower cost resources that people might not know about. I'm going to assume, even if you're just getting started, you've heard of Ancestry.com. So I don't usually post much about Ancestry. But if I find, I just put some a source for Georgia death certificates from the early 20th century up there. And I'll post the link and a little bit about what you will find at those sites. So it's a great way, if you're just getting started, to find some other resources of records that you may not have been aware of. Also, history is really important. It's important to understand your ancestors' history and the history of a place. So sometimes I will post stories about that, because context is really important for this work. So I would invite people to follow me, and you'll see those posts, and you can then go to those sites and do your own research.
So I put the link to your Facebook page and to for your website in the description of this video. So it's all there. But I would like to say, I thought it was very interesting that George Washington, they dabbled in genealogy. So that was interesting. That was a post on your page. So you have a lot of that. I find all that stuff very interesting. I love it all. I think it's great. I love, the thought of old homes with little secret passageways and all of that. So all of this is very interesting to me, but I'm also very excited to find my family in Sicily. So you and I will continue to work. So I encourage everybody who's watching or who is interested in their ancestors and their genealogy to follow Aubrey on White Birch Research on Facebook, Instagram, and she has her website, whitebirchresearch.com, and find your family, and then you can talk about it. Now we're all shut down, right? So we have
It's
nothing
a
else.
great time to do it.
Right. So how are you taking care of yourself during this time?
I'm enjoying not having a commute into Boston and out of Boston, so 2
Right.
commutes a day. That's been great for my mental health. It's actually given me an extra hour of sleep because the gym's not open. So before, when I would work from home, I would get up at the same time and go to the gym. I'm getting better sleep now, which is fantastic. Like I think many people, my house is slowly getting cleaner and cleaner, and there's more stuff going in the trash. I'll say, I will have Marie Kondoed the heck out of my life by that time. I'll be down to like 1 pair of pants, everything is getting reviewed and curated.
You're
and
decluttering.
tossed.
That's what I've been saying.
Decluttering,
Declutter from inside out. It's great. And I love that because you know what? You're taking care of yourself with all of that. So I think that's awesome. So thank you. Will you come back another time when, down the road?
I will.
Yeah, let's do this
talk
again.
about new discoveries and other tips. And yeah.
I love it. I love it. So, okay. Well, Aubrey, thank you for being here. And listen, everybody, take a risk, be vulnerable, share your heart and love always. Know I love you all. Wishing you love,